2021 on planet Earth sucked. Yeah, it's certainly an improvement over last year, but the bar is so low it's practically gone beneath the Earth's crust at this point. I can't speak to everyone's experience from last year, but you know, I was busy.
Blink over my hand.
Hell yeah.
What are the memes?
Games that took risks, that felt both familiar and fresh. Passion projects that took blood, sweat, tears, patience, goodwill, all while dealing with a once-in-a-century pandemic and still made it to the finish line in style. And yes, I know I'm certainly late to this party, but with a full-time job, it's tricky for me to talk about video games with a 401k that needs attending. Gotta save up for the future PlayStation 35. In fact, a trailer got released for it last year.
The year is 2021.
I can carry nearly 80 gigs of data in my head.
Alright, 80 gigs! I'll finally be able to play Pac-Man the way it was meant to be played.
Hit me.
I got to play a lot of amazing games, and while I'm going to have a lot more to say about a few of them, it feels like a shame to not talk about some of the amazing ones that I played. So for some groundwork, I'm not going to be including games from December 2021. It's not entirely fair to exclude them simply because I needed time to work on this video, so games like Love 3 and The Gunk are going to have to be saved until next year. And 2, I had to have either beaten the game or made it far enough along to have an informed opinion. So games like Loop Hero, Everhood, Eastward, and countless others aren't here because I haven't played them enough or at all. And this brings you fine friends to the full video with all the games in one big package. Now you can see the entire list by itself without needing a separate playlist to do so in a ad runtime here minute video, all for you to watch at once. I'm envious of your free time. I hope you enjoyed this little experiment. On to the full list.
Hell yeah.
Then let me begin with a question. Would you say you know the difference between right and wrong?
The Forgotten City isn't my usual kind of game. I tend to gravitate towards puzzle games, retro style platformers, or something that just sounds kind of interesting to try. I can't put as much time into well-written time sinks like your Fallouts or your Mass Effects, or your 50 different ports of Skyrim, so I'm just as surprised as you are that a game that started off as a mod for Skyrim, that turned into its own separate indie release, ate up a decent amount of my time last year. You're an unassuming modern-day character that finds yourself in a time loop inside an ancient Roman city, complete with ancient Romans, where you have to solve problems inside the city while trying to figure out how to get out of this Groundhog Day you find yourself in. There's really only one section of combat, and honestly it isn't all that great, but the meat of the game is discovering all the secrets and the colorful characters that the town has to offer. Dialogue is the main course in the menu, and the characters have plenty to say, and the good news is that the writing is fantastic across the board. I am no historian by any stretch of the imagination, but it's clear that modern storyteller did their homework here. You learn about the weird, quirky things Romans had to deal with. You get into debates about their ethics and standards for living, how other religions like Christianity changed their lives, and it puts a lot of historical context out there outside of Roman history. You being from the modern day, it lends itself an advantage where the characters you meet don't think of themselves as barbaric, but the most advanced civilization of its time.
Of course. What else would we do with those prisoners of war who would otherwise have been executed?
And it's not just a big history lesson either, as there's plenty of puzzles and interrogations to solve, and it's not an entirely dry, sterile world. It has a great sense of humor about its setting, and probably my favorite example comes with Sophia Roberts. She's an accomplished actress who's done VO work for the BBC, Amazon, Pepsi, and the like, someone whose voice gives historical and emotional weight to the game for its 2 characters that she plays, and they have her ask the question,
The memes? What are the memes?
And for as silly a moment as that is, it actually has a really intelligent answer to that question. There's a lot of smaller details I'd like to save for you to try yourself, including how you ultimately end up winning the day that I dare not spoil. The Forgotten City is certainly outside my comfort zone, but if you like adventure-style games, it's one of 2021's brightest.
The many shall suffer for the sins of the one.
A game isn't worthwhile if it doesn't innovate is a dangerous and dismissive attitude. It's one that's admittedly understandable given some of the other games on this list, but we shouldn't let games go by the wayside simply because on the surface it just feels like another one of those retro platformers. And on the surface, Here Comes Niko from the talented folks at Frog Vibes, and published by the talented folks at Gears for Breakfast, seems like a hat in time but with less to do. It also doesn't help that there's only a $5 price difference between the two. And what really makes this unique and a bright spot of last year is that it can best be summed up with its hilarious tagline. It's described as the cozy 3D platformer for tired people. To me, what the game does offer is an exercise in a chill tone. This isn't a challenging game. The levels are all confined on small islands, and as jokey as that tagline is, it's designed to be relaxing and low pressure. Something simple that you can get lost in, but does have depth in other ways. It's the lo-fi beats of indie gaming. It's something you don't have to think too much about and is very laid back. As much as Hat Kid showing up at the pool is fun fan service, it's also part of the gameplay philosophy, where it's a place where Hat Kid literally goes to relax. The last time Hat Kid tried to go on vacation, she ended up running errands, and it didn't quite go so well.
We're headed straight for an iceberg. All hands on deck.
Pretty bad, but I'm sure it has better Yelp ratings than Royal Caribbean. Although, like A Hat in Time, this is packed to the seams with charm and fun. It can have funny and unexpectedly dark turns, it has a minigame that's not a subtle nod to another indie darling, and it even has an arc for the main hero Niko, who herself is going through some issues and grows throughout the journey. She signs up to be a professional friend for a frog company, because, you know, they were hiring, because she felt lonely and in need of a break to figure things out. And I think that's what I appreciated so much from Here Comes Niko, is how focused it is at what it wants to do. While there are a few tricky puzzles, and it does offer a bit of extra challenges later on, it's a game that remembers that people play games to unwind and let out some tension. Its confidence in offering the retro platformer equivalent to a hot spa is the depth that it offers. Sometimes all we just need is a friend, and this felt like a great friend that we come to visit in 2021. Aww. I'm sure if you've been to this corner of the internet, that you know I love getting my hands dirty and digging for some indie hidden gems. Which touches on games that don't get quite as much fanfare, or really any fanfare, or in my opinion are a bit misunderstood. 9 times out of 10 it's because the game doesn't have a publisher, or it didn't take time to market itself, or with a publisher in a very highly competitive field of Game Pass games, big mainstream games, or hyped up heavily marketed indies aspiring to make darling status. And of course there's the army of game jam projects that didn't really care for commercial profit, which I'm ashamed to admit I haven't had as much time as I would like to look into those. So for this part, I wanted to spotlight some of my favorite hidden gems from last year that might have flown under your radar. I say that openly acknowledging that my first choice has a decent cult status with a few hundred positive reviews on Steam for it. In terms of a hidden indie gem, it's impressive, but in the wider space of video games, it's still Pluto amongst the gaming solar system. But I'd be remiss not to mention a game that just barely missed the main list with Genesis Noir. The core concept and idea behind it is something where I couldn't think of anything crazier if I tried. It's a game based on scientific findings of the universe, black holes, stars, constants, the works as a metaphor for a black and white Maltese Falcon story. I certainly can't fault it for having ambition, and it has impressive set piece after impressive set piece, sticking to its mostly black and white aesthetic. Every single level has their own unique puzzle explaining a scientific element of the universe while building up its main characters and their backstories. It's a search for personal identity, has a few playful nods to the scientific community, and somehow manages to cram findings of the entire universe into a roughly 3-hour experience. I know what I'm about to say feels like a half-hearted criticism of it, but it feels like Genesis Noir is trying a little bit too hard. The transitions here looks like they must have taken hours to animate with elaborate, busy set pieces, and it felt like it didn't need quite as much attention given to it. It felt like overload at times that wanted 3 elaborate big moments every 5 minutes, and when that happens, everything ironically becomes not as memorable. Although to be fair to the development team's credit, it's about the entire universe. It needs to be big, epic, and impressive, because as far as science knows, it's the most epic thing in existence. Genesis Noir is a highly impressive game, almost more than it needs to be, and as of recording is available on Game Pass. Give it a try for yourselves. I know the new ActRaiser game from last year met with some mixed reactions, or some pretty positive reactions judging by the Steam community, so I'd like to submit for your approval a weird, almost Barbarella version of ActRaiser that feels like a bit of a Mega Man X game with its action elements. Very much like ActRaiser, it's split up between an overhead, streamlined strategy game to gain control of other minions and resources, and then going down to the individual levels for some Super Nintendo-inspired action. Admittedly, the overhead strategy might be a little bit too streamlined for my taste, but the 2D elements have plenty of variety with your powers and attacks at your disposal. That and the bizarre Barbarella look of the game is a refreshing art style amongst indie platformers.
Unfortunately, the only reason it's not higher is, well, the game did crash on me. Admittedly, it really only happened once and I was able to regain my progress right away, but it is something to deal with. It's definitely one I'd like to revisit in the future.
Spookware, a goofy horror-themed WarioWare.
It began as a game jam project with 10 microgames in it, to later team up with the Dread XP team as part of their Dread X Collection 3.
And this version is a boosted full release with all the zany, hilarious minigames you come to expect from Wario's franchise. I wasn't the biggest fan of the Paper Mario exploration of the game. I was a bit anxious to get to the actual minigames, but each chapter you visit has its own shared theme, like playing musical instruments in the high school. The team are still hard at work adding extra chapters to the game, and although it didn't make the main list, I could see horror fans getting a fresh appreciation out of it. Or, flesh appreciation out of it.
Hell yeah.
Trash the Planet. I brought this up in my last Hidden Gems video, and it's worth mentioning here. This game is Haunted's not clicker game about leading an army of raccoons taking over the stock market with garbage. Well, that's really all I need to say, don't I? Rocket Raccoon takes over Wall Street with rubbish. It's inventive, has something to say, and is one of my favorite gems from last year. And again, it's free on your browser or computer, go give it a look. The Wild at Heart. I am a huge Pikmin fan. And since we don't know whenever the Big N and Miyamoto are going to give the okay on a sequel,
so while the wait isn't long anymore for the next big Pikmin,
The Wild at Heart should be on your radar if you're looking for that Pikmin fix. And as you can see from this gameplay, it's essentially a 2D Pikmin. And I can see others not being a big fan of its pacing, but it's totally worth adding to your wishlist.
the team at Moonlight Kids have a great understanding of Pikmin, and like that game, it features a variety of critters at your command, a slew of upgrades and crafting items to customize your playstyle, and a world to explore with many secrets to find. This is one I'd like to find more time to re-explore and really dive into. It's worth a look-see if you missed it on Game Pass. But of the many smaller hidden gems I got a chance to try last year, to me the gem that shined the brightest and one that takes this spot is easily the Gardener and the Wild Vines.
I brought this up in my last Hidden Gems video, and it's great enough to bring up back here. Utilizing a unique system for growing and climbing on top of a tower, and a sort of Mega Man Legends cel-shading look, it's a satisfying and rewarding experience with plenty of unique level design and a solid soundtrack. I don't want to sound too redundant here, after all I did make a whole video explaining the system, but one aspect I didn't mention is how well written it is. It's a minor part of the game, but the characters you interact with are given their own signature personalities, and go beyond the standard good guy, bad guy tropes. It goes a bit further to give the characters some emotional arcs to sort out. In spite of being a fairy tale, it goes beyond what you would expect out of it. Granted, you'll still be spending most of your time getting those combos, timing your jumps, and snacking extra lovebirds on the journey. It's an inventive, well-polished gem that deserves a lot more than the internet gave it. I urge you to try it for yourself and wishlist this Tale of Foliage. There are games out there that need a bit of explanation to their main idea and what makes them unique. It could be like This Is Like Zelda, but you're in a Groundhog Day style loop.
Or it's like if the internet from the mid-90s were resurrected and may have gone through the transporter in The Fly.
This is what the internet does to people.
And then there are games that are GIFable, where the unique and interesting feature can be summed up in a looping 3-second video. So to test my little theory, I'm going to see how GIFable this next choice of interactive entertainment is. Let's give it a try. Yes, I knew it! My theory was correct. Moncage is a highly unique puzzle game where it all takes place on this cube on a table. The cube can be rotated on its top and 4 sides, where you have to match certain objects so they can connect between each of the pieces in order to open up new hidden rooms in each of the faces of the cube. It's one that had me geeking out in the past when I first heard about it, and now it's free to roam on Steam in 2021. It has a good amount of challenge to it, as it's not just one to match various objects in the cube, but figure out what the next step is for that. You'll end up in scenarios where there are multiple solutions, so if you're stuck on one part, you can look at another aspect of the puzzle to open up there. The extra part I like is the solid hit system that actively discourages you from using it at the pause screen. Clicking on it will have it slowly reveal the next hint, but it gives you a chance to back out if you want to try and solve it for yourself. I admit I did use this hint system most of the time, and I do genuinely feel like I could have gotten it if I spent more time on it. There was only once with a lantern puzzle that felt somewhat inconsistent with its main idea, but all the other puzzles were reasonable where I could have figured it out myself. On top of all this, there is a story going on with the setting that the game is presenting. I don't want to give a whole lot away, but the cube, the puzzles, and admittedly a hint right there in the title, help frame what the main character is going through as a solid metaphor. It's able to do all of this with no dialogue and entirely through its setting. It's a very short game depending on your own wits, but it's one I'm happy made it to the finish line. It met all the expectations I had for it, its storytelling techniques are solid and entirely unexpected, and it's just such a cool idea for a puzzle game. And good news, Moncage actually made it on the Switch very recently. Puzzle enthusiasts should not look this one over. Normally I try to avoid early access games simply because I don't want it to affect my opinion of the final finished game. It's not always a finite rule though, as there are exceptions here and there, sometimes based off of goodwill from the company and others for the sake of a discount. It feels a bit unfair to put this game on the list, but after looking long and hard, I honestly had more fun with the early version of this than I had with a lot of other finished games this year. I'm confident in the company's goodwill and what they've done so far with the game that it makes it easy for me to add 30XX to my list. The last game, 20XX, was going through essentially the same early access design philosophy, and so far it's working great for battery-stable games. For the uninitiated, 30XX is a procedurally generating Mega Man X-style game, where every time you start it gives you a random layout for its stages. There's still different robot bosses to fight as you get further and further into the levels, and bosses and levels get harder and harder to conquer as you get further. You make progress every time with various tokens to boost yourself up, while still finding a good balance and difficulty curve as you play. It packs a pretty strong, memorable soundtrack, which you really need when making a Mega Man-like. It looks great, and there's plenty of variety to be found in the boss fights. My personal favorite being Hoot Omega, where getting past the stage itself is the boss battle. And that variety also extends to its level design. Every stage offers various themes, such as vertical switches in one area, or having a V-style gravity switching stage in another. As you get further and further into your runs, the enemies get harder and more frequent. Granted, this is still in early access, so balancing issues and strategies on how to get through are still getting worked on. I admit I haven't made it to the finish line yet, but that's only because its design, weapons, and balancing are still in the oven. It has nothing to do with my lack of skill and carelessness. But that is something to bring up. Like the original Mega Man X games, this does demand a bit of patience. If you go into the game rushing and being careless, you're sent back on a brand new run. And if you're not a fan of the starting from scratch method of most roguelikes, the game has an extra mode where you don't have to start from the very beginning if you die, and you just end up going in the last stage you're in. It's a welcome addition in case you weren't as big a fan of the classic roguelike mode of 20XX. I've got a lot more to say about 30XX, but for now, much like 20XX, it finds a way to make the procedural generation work in a Mega Man tribute that I couldn't get enough of. More stuff's being added to the game all the time. This will be on my radar and it should be on yours as well. There are some games where I admittedly sound like I'm insane in how I spend my gaming time. The power fantasies of your sports games, your first-person shooters, or even Super Mario make sense. There's a sense of freedom and adrenaline that comes with those games, where you're winning the big game, getting headshots against other humans, or you're an Italian plumber in a fungus-based land where you have go-karting, tennis, and a doctorate to occupy your hobbies. Well, okay, maybe I sound just as insane with that description, but especially with bedroom programmers trying to out-weird each other in some pitches, it makes me sound like I'm either nuts or just so phenomenally boring that I'm one step away from being Herbert from accounting, who collects stamps and whose favorite superhero movie is still Daredevil from 2003. This next one's going to make me sound like one of those characters, so here goes. One of my favorite games of the year is about unpacking my stuff for the first half of my life from a kid to my adult years. There's no shooting, no jump scares, no power fantasy, it is all unpacking stuff and putting it away. And it's somehow f***ing genius. I'll admit that you just unpack stuff is a condescending and oversimplification for unpacking, but I was genuinely surprised with how much the game has to offer. The complexity here comes from its design in a way that tells you not just about the character you play, but about yourself. How we organize our stuff and how much we present it tells us so much about ourselves, and it has a story to tell with the character that you're unpacking for. You follow them in various homes, starting from your childhood to your first places in college up until the final boss of your first home, and the small objects you put away tell you about your character's mental state, what they've decided to hold on to, other things that they've let go throughout their life, and various things like books or games or clothes that don't fill in the gaps of their creativity or their self-image. This is all done through smart gameplay, like a relationship that feels a bit uneasy, or you simply can't touch or move any of the stuff from one roommate, which really comes into play with how different it is later in the game. And Unpacking does offer solid challenges with limited spaces to put your stuff, where you may only have a certain amount of coat hangers or wall space, and even the decorations can be a bit tricky to figure out. The game even grades you on putting your stuff in a specific part, while you have to learn not to live like a hoarder and put it up in the right spot. And the extra secrets, like unlocking various trophies, are a welcome addition and admittedly really funny. The game is available on the computer and the 3 major home consoles, that includes the Series X and PlayStation 5, meaning you have the option to play with the obvious choice for this, a mouse and keyboard. I played this through Xbox Game Pass with an Xbox controller, and I can safely say it's no deal breaker. It didn't feel cumbersome, and you'll be able to adapt to the controller no problem. The mouse and keyboard are probably the best way to go, but I still totally recommend playing the game on a game console with those pesky buttons and joysticks. No matter how you decide to play the game, it's an easy recommendation with its strange power of immersion and a clear level of heart and passion that went into it. It sounds really silly for me to say that this is one of my favorites until you try it for yourself. A lot of people getting into game development right now are beginning designers. And with beginning designers, there's a level of cockiness, eagerness, and immaturity that can really benefit them. There's a level of delightful immaturity in Undertale, for example, when Toby Fox made that in his mid-20s. From the simple character designs to how it was written, even how the game was marketed and the achievements you can get in the game, it felt like a teenager was behind the wheel. It had that fun, positive, meme-loving tone that really could only have come from a developer at that young age. But on the opposite end, developers who've polished their game-making guns and have some tales to tell in the trenches can also benefit from having much more life experience. They've dealt with demons, helped others deal with their demons, and have learned how to share those experiences through our favorite hobby. In retrospect, this game, even though we're playing through the eyes of an eager youngling who's probably a little bit too much of a teacher's pet, it's Psychonauts 2 mature and experienced developers that really make it shine. I honestly had mixed expectations for Raz's next big adventure, and after I played it, it was everything I hoped it would be. It adds plenty of variety to its core design, it looks breathtaking, and granted that might be Microsoft stepping in and helping. It carries that strange irony that made Double Fine such a respected studio. Platformers are one of my favorite genres, and this offers a solid challenge, and while the combat is somewhat basic, it gets the job done and has some tricks up its sleeve. For me, the real star of the show are the rich characters that are told through their inventive and clever levels. Just to name a few, there's a character that inhibits different personas where you figure out her insecurities. It even dives into light philosophy that adds depth to Raz as well.
Who is the real Rasputin? The one you are with your friends? With your family? Is that the real you?
You enter the mind with a history as a medical worker, complete with memories of working at a hospital, which are the first part of the level. With your eagerness to psychonaut all the way, you accidentally cause an addiction problem. Later, you visit the same hospital, all decked out as a casino. It's strange, it's trippy, and it's very clever.
Banana! Infection?
And probably the biggest highlight is another character dealing with addiction, where both its visual and level design help you sort out his problems, or at least deal with his sense of grief. Each of them offer an extra level of character development, where there's probably a great video essay that can be written and made about each level here. In fact, that actually has happened with written essays and right here on YouTube. It's also a meaty adventure taking a decent amount of time to beat, with completionist tasks that I took time to do, especially after their quality of life patch, making those figments so much easier to find. Double Fine lead designer Seth Marinello explained one specific collectible for this quality of life patch.
This banana, which I apologize for.
Oh, an apology! After looking at every blasted list of figments, soaring the internet for any helpful walkthroughs that don't help, and looking on every nook and cranny with similarly colored levels trying to figure out those damn things, and you're sorry! I guess that makes my hours in endless gameplay a whole fine, right? And I'll admit there are some issues here. It's a Double Fine game, so the characters love talking constantly.
So like 11 by 14 inches? No, that's legal. hold out for the bacon.
And admittedly, the final reveal of the big mystery of the game is a little bit too coincidental for me to fully buy. It's a bit of a stretch for me, but at the same time, it's a bit of a nitpick of a criticism on my part, and certainly no deal breaker. Whether or not Double Fine counted as an indie company is way too subjective to talk about in this little video, but I'm definitely going to miss what that two-headed Hydra did outside of the realms of Microsoft. In the very beginning of the company, its developers and Tim Schafer himself were Raz in the story, eager to prove themselves, immature, and sometimes got their giant heads stuck into some trouble.
Ow! A party!
For Psychonauts 2, the team has become the consolers themselves, an outsider organization in the broad stream of gaming, but still a big establishment. The focus of their older characters are much more rich because in their 20 years, they've grown up. The game examines what they've left behind and how they've learned to deal with their own demons. And their more mature takes dealing with mental health issues, and consulting with mental health experts really shows in the game.
We all have our doubts and regrets, but it's too late to turn back now, understand?
Double Fine's tenure as their own company with their library always kept their playful tone. Psychonauts 2 is a great note for them to go out on, and hopefully, the wait won't be long to hear from them again. As you're probably aware if you stumble across this corner of the internet, that I am a fan of the Zelda-like. It's a long trend of games that I really started to take notice in 2017, where a lot of smaller indies at that E3 had clearly taken a few notes from Miyamoto and class to create a lot of really fantastic games that feel like the adventures of our favorite green-tunicked hero. 2021 had a lot to offer and a bunch more in my backlog, so here I wanted to show a few that I enjoyed. The first one is easily my favorite game name of the year, with Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion. That ridiculous name tells you everything you need to know about its tone and sense of humor, meshing together high fantasy video game characters against a high organization that even strikes a wave of fear into the Joker.
I'm crazy enough to take on Batman, but the IRS? No, thank you.
The adventure is pretty standard Zelda fare, with an overhead view that grants Turnip Boy more abilities, unlocking new areas with a very meme-friendly sense of humor. The main adventure, though, is pretty short, taking only about 3 hours to beat. I can certainly appreciate the brevity of that, but there is an additional mode for free that adds a little bit of content. It's one I really want to revisit and dive deeper into, but for now, I'll say it's a solid Zelda tribute that's worth a look-see. Another major Zelda-like that you might have heard about is also Death's Door, which has gotten a lot of love to it. As the Nerve's follow-up to Titan Souls, which itself has a little bit of Hyrule in its blood, it didn't quite make my main list, but I totally get why it's earned such a cult status. It's an inventive world that starts with your main hero being a Crow Grim Reaper. Their job is to go in the real world and capture new souls to bring into the great unknown. In the game, a soul they captured gets stolen from them, and because of the world's rules, they're stuck in purgatory for all eternity until they get them back. Hayao Miyazaki is cited by the team as being a large inspiration, and it's very clear to see, especially with the witch character, which playing through the game you discover their tragic arc. Combat will feel right at home for any fan of Hyper Light Drifter, involving adapting to a strict understanding of its hit detection, the dodge rolls you'll be performing, and your long-range weapons. For me, it's a little bit too strict on that. The controls are about 90% there, and some of the baddies are inconsistent to the point where I can't judge the hit detection or get the timing just right. It felt not entirely there. The good news is that you're not just stuck to face that death screen for all eternity, as there are plenty of ways to beef yourself up and make harder sections much more manageable. I would cautiously recommend Death's Door, as it might be a little bit too tough for people's tastes, and I'd like to save my full thoughts for this adventure for another day. I will say though that Death's Door is a mountain to climb, and it felt damn good and rewarding to see its summit. Besides Death's Door, however, for the main spot on my list, there were two major ones from last year that really captured my imagination. The first is Unsighted, which unfortunately got well known with the fact that it wasn't well known at the beginning, but that's another story altogether. It combines a lot of familiar tropes, like a crafting system, dungeons with puzzles to solve, a Metroidvania-style map, a variety of support characters, and a top-down view utilizing a cross between twin-stick shooter for projectiles and Hyper Light Drifter's intense swordplay. But the main unique mechanic is what gives the game its ultimate weight. You have the option to play the game where all of your friends, including yourself, have a time limit. If you take too long in your adventure, or can't find enough resources to help sustain the lives of your associates, then they're dead, including yourself. No convenient game saves before then,
No Phoenix Downs, no unsnapping with the Infinity Stones, no do-overs, they are gone for good. This adds so much weight to all of your decisions going forward. And that precious dust supply is also for yourself, which really makes it more imperative to get good at your actions or get smart and selective with your rations. The second Zelda-like that really struck with me is Shikori, A Colorful Tale. It's basically Zelda if the heroes of time were all artists that can add color to the world and use it to navigate dungeons and stop monsters. You're a brand new creator, and the journey has you not only painting and doing the usual Zelda formula, but also becoming an artist yourself.
And that's not just limited to the main character, but for you, the player.
The game has a really playful nature where you can basically color anything in the world. That's including the menus, the map screen, and even some of the clothes that you wear in your journey. The story is also very well written, and it takes time not only to celebrate art, but to examine the toxicity that artists go through. It's both an internal and external struggle that finds really inventive ways of expressing that. And between these two games that are wholly unique in how they tell stories, the weight you feel for your characters, and how they add something unique to the Zelda formula, and still found a great unique identity, made it really hard for me to pick between the two, so why not both? Yep, I'm cheating a little bit, but Shikori and Unsighted are some of the brightest spots in the indie realm from last year. If you do have a choice between the two, I'd recommend Shikori for younger audiences, as it's a bit easier to play, and actually has a great reason for being as easy, with the idea that art should be as accessible to everyone. And Unsighted I would recommend for more experienced players, but the game does have great options for difficulty, including the option to not play with a time limit, and to just enjoy the game on its own. And trust me, I have a lot more to say about both of these games, and this channel's not done with them yet.
This next pick will surprise absolutely no one who follows this channel. Before Your Eyes meant enough to me to make an entire video out of it, not just about the merits of the game, but how much I realized I needed to hear what it had to say. I don't want to sound too redundant here, after all you can watch that video right now on YouTube, but there were a few fun details that I left out. One of my favorite tidbits was for Chloe, the neighbor kid next door who was originally set to have an actor playing them, and then Heidi Kang, a girlfriend of one of the developers, was put in as a temporary actress to test out the technology. The team ended up liking her so much in the role that she ended up getting the part, and her performance is absolutely a highlight in the game that already shares some standout performances from Stephen Frederick, Eric Idleson, and Sarah Burns respectively. Which, by the way, if you're watching Barry, the Bill Hader series on HBO, Sarah Burns plays a recurring character in the show with a completely different attitude than the mother Ellie in Before Your Eyes. And that kind of magic, my friends, is called acting.
But since the last video, there's a large update in the game worth mentioning. A mobile version! Using the camera on your smartphone, you can play the game using it, where it detects your blinks, and it works great on my iPhone 8. That I am nearsighted, so it is nice to play the game without glasses on, at least for me. Admittedly, some of the textures do take a bit of a hit, and there were some lip syncing issues here and there.
Soul's worth pulling up.
And coming from the PC version, to be able to move the mouse you'll have to swipe the screen here and there, but I've got a feeling that if you haven't played this before, then you won't mind since you'll be crying tears of joy in experiencing the story for the first time. If you're subscribed to Netflix, you can get this on Apple and Android, so your excuses for putting it off are dwindling. If you know somebody who hasn't played it yet, you now have it in your pocket and can show unassuming local people. Granted, it wouldn't be the first time I've done so, that's why I can't enter Delaware. Long story. So for this video, I'd like to do something a bit different and read something that I wrote for the game. I hope you excuse the somewhat different style and the slight, plagiarism. People who play games, living ordinary lives in their ordinary homes, enjoyed their time sharing memes, seeing each other at events, and found time for their families. But then, roughly 2 years ago, people began getting sick, and most were forced to stay inside while brave, self-sacrificing people helped others for the greater good. And in that time, people began to worry that they haven't lived enough. So Goodbye World Games made up a story about how we think we aren't living the great lives that we thought we lost, and reminded us of the great lives that we're already living. How it made a gimmick of tracking your own blanks into a wonderfully written story about how you still make a difference for those that you love. How you fill others' lives with light and joy and promise, and how, even as the world seemed to be crumbling around us, you still gave the world hope. A true hope. How Before Your Eyes reminded us who we were, after we had almost forgotten, and how it did it with joy and humor. How Before Your Eyes told us that we're exactly who we needed to be. exactly as we were.
Long video short here, Inscryption is the shit. Yeah, sorry to spoil that one for you, but wrapping up all the games that I played last year, it became such a blatantly clear as day obvious choice to award my game of the year to this wonderfully deceptive roguelike card game. And chances are by now you've at least heard about Inscryption.
The game has garnered over 70,000 positive reviews on Steam and counting, which is insane. Granted, it was a computer exclusive most of the year and only just recently made it on home consoles, but still! Inscryption was nominated for a few game awards, and just comparing it to a few of those games, it's garnered more positivity on Steam than Deathloop, Psychonauts 2, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and Life is Strange True Colors combined. It out Steam reviewed them in the game's first 2 months, and a year later, that hasn't changed. As of now, it's out Steam reviewed a hat in time, and that game's almost 5-year lifespan. It's a game that's become so huge, you could see it from space. Vancouver-based Daniel Mullins started as a programmer in the games industry until he released his first commercial indie game, Pony Island. That game went on to become a critical darling, earning high review scores from both PC Gamer and IGN. Back in 2018, while wrapping up his next game, The Hex, he participated in the Ludum Dare 43 Game Jam, or the Ludum Dare Game Jam if you want to sound fancy, or correct. I never really bothered to look up how to pronounce that, but I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. Ludum Dare, for those who don't know, is a competition where you develop a game in one dedicated 48-hour weekend, or a separate group with a longer development time, both sharing a common theme. The theme for that game jam was Sacrifices Must Be Made, and as a gamer himself, Mullins was getting back into Magic the Gathering. He entered into Ludum and wanted to explore the theme with a similar card game all about sacrificing things. So Mullins made his game as the same name as the theme, maybe a little bit cocky there, and it did incredibly well, taking second place in the overall combo section of the jam. So after finishing up The Hex, he decided his next larger project was going to expand on the Game Jam game, which eventually became Inscryption as we know today. And the original Game Jam project of making sacrifices to get beefier cards is the core mechanic here. You'll have to put down cards on the table to serve as sacrifices to unlock cards with larger attacks from your hand. I would describe the game as an escape room, folk song-esque, horror-like, roguelike made for those who have a fondness for Magic the Gathering or the Pokemon trading card game. That's a lot, but let me explain. Basically, you're stuck inside a cabin with a mysterious figure that challenges you to a card game to trust the heart of the cards, for what purpose we don't yet know. That's the folk song part. You go through multiple runs and are able to build a stronger deck and unlock new abilities as you go. And each round where you're losing feels like you're making a little bit of progress, and nothing feels like a cheap death. It's clear that Daniel Mullins and developers spent a good amount of time balancing out the cards, where all the risk and reward decisions and the little extra tricks you can implement find your way through. And the room around you are where those extra puzzles come into play, as they unlock secrets to get more of the story and to help you build a stronger deck. Deciding which path you want to proceed to, trying your luck to beef up your cards or risk losing them, and even when you're about to win a match to see which extra items you like to save for later. And I'm purposefully only showing about an hour of gameplay here because alas, a lot of the reasons I'm giving this my game of the year are a massive spoiler. No, seriously, don't skim ahead to the rest of the video to see what I have to say. Inscryption really is like Undertale, and that you should really experience this one for yourselves, going in as blind as possible. The game is absolutely excellent. Wishlist it or wait for a console version if you have to. I implore you, this is one not to be missed. And I'm going to be entering spoiler land in 3, 2, 1. Fans of this game, online publications reviewing it, and for the most part Devolver Digital have been very smart about hiding a lot of what the game has to offer. And the second I was able to unlock a new game, and after that, I could not get enough of this thing. Holy shit, there's a second part? And it's like the Pokemon trading card game where you can build decks? There are 3 other sub-bosses with their own mechanics to them. I can use jewels to add buffs, and other characters with electricity. There's so much I can do with that. And then there's the whole story with the influencer Luke. In all the years that I've spent playing games and watching movies, I can guess how a story is going to play out. Link will be able to save Hyrule, I'm going to get my revenge for Japan in Ghost of Tsushima, and even amongst indie games, I'm going to beat the devil in Cuphead. I was reminded of watching Parasite for the first time, and that I legitimately had no idea where Inscryption was going, what was going to happen to the characters, where the original disc came from, who those card characters were in the beginning, and so on. Afterwards, I looked up videos and Steam discussions to really dive into the game's lore. It has a Five Nights at Freddy's element to it of discovering the story, except the gameplay isn't centered around jump scares, but a really solid, polished, and in-depth card system. I've been on Discord with a friend of mine who coincidentally also gave the game a perfect score. Toasty! And as I was playing, I'm like, oh, you got to that part, oh, you got to this part. The last time I remember talking about friends this much in depth about a game was Breath of the Wild. I cannot overstate how much I gushed about this game's many hidden surprises, and I'm only going to name a few. There's a boss that uses your friend's Steam account and turns them into cards battling you. Toasty! You have to use actual files on your computer and gain extra health points depending on the size of the files. The Paranormal Activity-esque breakdown of Luke. How Daniel Mullins and Devolver went out of their way to make an actual entire YouTube channel from Luke with the Lucky Carter, giving lots of fun cryptic lore to dive into.
What the f*** is going on?
There's one boss fight that purposefully uses game-breaking mechanics to it. At that point, the game is just flat out showing off about how great it is.
Mullins has shown enormous growth as a developer since his debut game Pony Island, which was touching on a lot of the same ideas, using meta gameplay mechanics to try and escape out of the pit of hell of playing the game. But Pony Island, that is, the game within the game, which is generic with a confusing control scheme that's supposed to be a hellish experience, Inscryption's card system is a polished, in-depth game that's open to strategy and risk and reward mechanics. It makes Inscryption's pacing feel a lot more smooth. The longer story breaks were the welcome rewards, but actually playing the game was just as rewarding itself. Mullins has also stated the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series as being a big inspiration, and it was delightful to have the moon be the final boss in the cabin, and the dual disc launcher showing up at the climax, which was a delightfully nerdy nod. Granted, the first part of the cabin is rightfully challenging and really made me plan and think about what I wanted to do, the 2D and Bottopia sections felt a lot easier to get through in comparison. It was still a challenge, but it didn't feel like as much of an accomplishment as the first part. That's my biggest criticism about Inscryption. We get a taste of using the electricity and the gems in the game, but we never get a difficult enough challenge where we plan out and how to get the best out of our decks. I do remember, at least in the Pokemon trading card game of the Game Boy Color, you had to do some planning and take some time to be the very best, and I wish there was an extra mode here, or a more difficult setting to really utilize those extra cards. Well, there is some good news in the form of Casey's Mod. This is an extra free mode they added to the currently 3D half of the game, where you start off with a limited deck and have to make it to the end with a modifier limiting your abilities. Unfortunately, as of making this video, this extra mode is a bit limited. When you lose, and you will be losing a few times, there isn't really much of any progress in terms of making or getting new cards to beef yourself up, and all of the fun extra deck building you can do in the 2D section of the game isn't here at all. This is a very welcome mode. It will test your skill and has a lot of hidden extra lore to sink into, and it's still very limited with what the base game is capable of. I'm hoping for more extras and updates along the way, but Casey's Mod will have to do for now. I'm certainly no experienced developer in knowing how hard it is to implement an extra mode, but I would love to see them make some kind of multiplayer part of this. And Devolver has special reserve games, not just for their physical games, but the board game Reigns, and if they somehow dedicated a full physical card game for Inscryption, they'd make a killing.
You know what that is? You know what that is? Vintage packs of Inscryption. 4 of them.
And I come to the point where me saying I want more of the game is sort of the ultimate irony of it. The lesson it has to offer is how diving too much into Pandora's box can spell doom, as it did for poor Luke and potentially for others that have found the hidden original disc. This is a game that very much invites you to investigate and search deeper and deeper into this possibly demonic curse. Finding out about the larger hidden secrets and solving the mystery is part of what makes Luke both a victim and the reason for his own downfall. His obsession and curiosity when he got too close, and how he almost unleashed something incredibly dangerous onto the internet and to humanity. Yet he pursues his curiosity, perhaps even against his own free will. It's all a metagame about asking for too much, yet it invites you to explore further down the rabbit hole with this augmented reality game. In Pony Island, that was a game that was supposed to be intentionally a gateway to a torturous hell, and the irony here is that when the gameplay is great, it can still lead you into hell. And, well, even with that meta lesson, the ultimate irony is that I still want more. Maybe that whole message is a bit of an Andy Kaufman-esque troll, where Mullins and Devolver laugh at how much we don't get the message, but I don't think that's entirely true. Here's when that changes. Those extra messages in the ARG found in the game were decoded by some incredibly smart folks on Mullins' Discord. YouTuber Flemonade, and I am genuinely jealous of that name, did a whole video about how the Discord community decoded those messages. I recommend watching the whole video since the ARG is all done. It's pretty wild how they figured it all out. Actually, you can watch it right now. I'll wait. Oh wait, you don't have an hour to spare right now. That's the whole idea of me breaking up these videos. Long story short, they found real-life coordinates to find an extra clue that ultimately culminated in a real-life website where 3 real-life people gave real-life addresses to receive a real-life floppy disk in real life. Is this real life? In getting those coordinates, Mullins himself and Kevin Saxby, the actor who plays Luke, joined them in finding those actual discs. Mullins is clearly having a blast making that ARG, and allowing others to uncover the secrets to the game. It's one of those rare games that openly invites you to dig into those deep secrets front and center. Everything you see of the tragedy of poor Luke is all after the fact of how the Steam page even came to be, and in the way the internet gathering together to uncover the secrets that in a small way may avenge Luke. He was ultimately trying to do the right thing by exposing and destroying the Inscryption disc, and us uncovering the mystery is in a way a form of justice. I mean, obviously this is all fake and Game Funa isn't a real thing, but even outside of the game in the real world, Mullins and his team found ways to impress.
You're not supposed to have that, but it says Inscryption on it. What do you mean? Just don't take that, okay?
This is the first game I've played from Daniel Mullins, and the talent and passion that went into this one is off the charts. It has a solid and well-balanced difficulty, a story that had me glued to the screen. I wrote down notes for clues and looked up the game's lore outside of playing it. And even outside of the game, it found ways to impress that are maybe standard for ARG games, but the idea of putting that front and center for people to solve is an amazing touch. I know my channel is built on being mostly positive, and I say a lot of nice things all the time about different games, but I want you to understand with complete sincerity that Inscryption is masterful. It is a truly excellent treasure of a game, a once-in-a-year gem that's earned every ounce of hype you've heard about. I don't know if Daniel Mullins will have it in him to make something as impactful as Inscryption again. Something I know is dangerous to say that Inscryption is a masterpiece in setting him up for unrealistic expectations going forward as an artist. For me, if he were a filmmaker like Martin Scorsese, I'm hoping this will be his Taxi Driver. Important, impactful, it very much defines part of what the artist is all about, and hopefully will be the very first of many more masterpieces. And Daniel Mullins, if you are watching this video and are up for it, I would love to show my appreciation to you if you and me could get together. And those are my favorite games that I played in 2021. And yes, it is just impossible to play every single indie game that came out last year. Feel free to sound off in the comments about your favorite indie games from last year. And of course, if you'd like to see more videos, hit the bell, subscribe, and do all that fun stuff. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.